Lordy, lordy, look who's 40. It is our Matt season that is turning 40 today. Welcome to Wheel of Mind, everyone, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. This season, we've been reading Matt Cawthon's perspective for 40 episodes, and this one is our final Matt episode in Towers of Midnight. I'm your co-host, Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskell, a scholar from Eelfinn. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in-depth character reread podcast, so this is your only spoiler warning. We may drop a spoiler at any time from any of the books from here on out. Now today, we're examining chapters 54, 55, and 57 from Towers of Midnight. And I'll get us started with chapter 54, entitled The Light of the World. Matt, Tom, and Noel stood in the giant star-shaped chamber lit by those wan yellow lights, discussing what to do next. The air had not only a musty, stale smell to it, but also the musky smell of a predator's lair. There was nothing that could make this place any creepier, unless it was those rustling sounds of the creatures moving in the darkness at the edge of the room. Matt urged Tom to start playing some music. They found the melted lump on the floor that had once been the twisted stone doorway. There was no way out there. One of the Eelfinn approached him from behind in the darkness with a whispered, "Welcome, son of battles." Yeah, not creepy at all. The Eelfinn tried to get them to leave behind their offensive implements. Matt told them there would be no bargains until they made him in the Chamber of Bonds. Other Eelfinn came, saying a few words, then fading back into the shadows. The music and the lights seemed to be holding them at bay, but just barely. The Eelfinn were coming in faster now, speaking, fading back, and began working themselves up into a frenzy. Tom stopped with the flute, as it didn't seem to be working anymore anyway. Matt tried to roll his dice for some guidance, but an Eelfinn darted in on all fours and snatched them away. Matt took a swipe at it with his ashendari, but the blade passed through it like smoke. That's right, iron was their weakness. Tom's thrown knife did hit its mark, and Matt crushed another Eelfinn's face with the iron-shod end of his staff. The Eelfinn came at them, some scuttling on all fours, some yipping like foxes. They skirmished lightly, but the Eelfinn kept fading back. Then a group started heading their way with bronze lances. Those were able to strike from a bit further away. "Once this goes off, I'm going to close my eyes and spin about," Matt said, pulling out a night flower, lighting it, and throwing it out into the darkness. The sound of the explosion was followed quickly by animal screams and the sound of dropped weapons. Matt rushed ahead, leading Noel and Tom into the five-sided corridor that they had not been able to see from before. Time was strange here, so Matt wasn't sure if they ran for hours or just moments, but suddenly they came to the chamber. It was shaped like an 8-sided star, with yellow glowing stripes running up the walls and with 8 pedestals. It was exactly as Matt remembered it, except for the woman floating in the middle of the room, surrounded by a fine mist. It was Moiraine. Matt reached for her, but the mist burned him like fire. Light that was hot. Undeterred, Tom reached through the burning mist and grabbed the unconscious Moiraine, wrapping her up in his cloak and carrying her like a baby. Tom pulled off the bracelet she was wearing, which had been the only thing she had been wearing, and mentioned that it looked like a ter'angreal. "It is an angreal," a voice proclaimed from behind them, "strong enough to be nearly sa'angreal. It could be part of her price, should you wish to pay it." It was one of the Eelfinn. There were 8 of them now, 1 on each pedestal, all clothed in white. Matt very carefully made his demands. The way out was to be restored. It must not be blocked by anything made to vanish or move about, but must be there in a direct path. And thirdly, the foxes were not allowed to kill them or keep them there. "The price has been set," one Eelfinn said, and Matt knew it to be true. Somehow, he felt like he'd known what this price was going to be as soon as he'd read Moiraine's letter to Tom. "I'll pay it," Matt announced. "Half the light of the world." The group of Eelfinn jumped down from their pedestals and surrounded Matt. He warned Tom and Noel back, knowing that if they interfered, they might all die there. One Eelfinn suddenly ripped Matt's left eye out from its socket. Matt fell to his knees, screaming in pain. It was so much worse than he had expected. The Eelfinn around him fed on the thin white and red vapor that streamed off from Matt. He screamed again and again, and then the Eelfinn dropped to the ground, drunk in ecstasy from his sensations. Then Noel and Tom helped Matt to his feet, and he gathered up his hat and his eshandari. They left the room and walked down the hallway, straight to the large room where they had fought earlier. There were no Eelfinn here now to deter them. It seemed that the creatures kept to their bargains. They continued on, down a corridor, and made their way to the chamber in which they had first arrived, but instead they began seeing movement in the distance. It's like a group of people coming toward them. Noel admitted that his command of the old tongue was not good, but he had heard the bargain that Matt had made, how the foxes could not hurt them. "But what about the others?" Noel asked. "The Eelfinn." "Run!" Matt yelled. "Which direction?" Noel asked, alarmed. "Any direction," Matt yelled, "as long as it's away from them."
All right, so this chapter is such a huge moment for Matt that in order to keep myself and my thoughts kind of organized instead of just devolving into incoherent like squee just out of excitement, yes. I'm going to try to address some smaller points from this chapter first so that I can save the bigger, deeper discussion points for later. So cool. One of the few small things I noticed is that Matt was looking for comfort in his medallion early in this chapter, and I thought that was strange. I think it just goes to show all the different kind of nonsensical thoughts that might pop into your head when you're really scared. Right. It never once crossed my mind that either groups of Finn might be able to channel. I mean, I never even thought to think it through in the way that he did. He thought it out and then ruled it out, right? But I never even got that far because we don't have any indication that they do anything similar to that. Plus, it would have just been too convenient if they'd given him protection against themselves, right? They gave him escape from them with the Ashandara, as we'll see a little bit later. I think Matt's a little more reasonable than that. I think this just goes to show how scared he is, and it's not the only indicator of that. Several times early in this chapter, or a few times throughout this chapter, there's mentions of Matt's palms being sweaty and of having sweat on his brow and stuff like that. And I don't remember language like this about him before now in all of our 40 episodes. There may be some and I just missed it. The fights we get from his perspective, or he might actually be sweating in the moment, are usually over pretty quickly. So we might have gotten some sweat when he was fighting Galad and Gawain, but that was over pretty fast. And then those prolonged dangerous situations like battles where we know he's got to be pretty sweaty by the end of it, we don't get his real-time perspective of those usually.
Right.
So I think this just goes to show how extremely scary the situation is for him, because I don't remember him having sweaty palms when he's on the rooftops in Tarvalin, running away from what he thinks are footpads, when he's on the rooftops of Tyr, running into Aiel, when he's inside the Stone of Tyr, battling High Lords of Tyr and things like that. Even when he's been in the Finn realms before in Sindal, his other two previous trips, he hasn't had sweaty palms. So this just goes to show how much the danger has been ratcheted up for him, I think.
Right. And as well, just the unsettling creepiness of it. In a battle, as much as Matt hates those, he knows what to expect in a battle. He's had the arrow wounds, the cuts, all the unexpected things, but he expects the unexpected in a battle. But in this, you don't know what to expect. Yeah. Like you said, the thoughts of, what if they channel? Well, the Ogier don't channel, so maybe these guys don't either. And he hadn't seen any indication of it, but that was still something that you could tell rattled him. It really bothered him, and for good reason, because everything about this setting is made to be as creepy as you can get it. It has, people wearing straps made from human skin. The smells. I do like the way this described in the beginning. You have the musty staleness, which he remembered, but then that odor of like it being an animal's lair, and just this, kind of tangy or musky scent to it. A predator's lair, not just an animal's lair, but a predator's lair. So, everything about this place is just designed to give you fear, to give you as much fear as possible. Because again, they drink that in. They even mentioned it, right before plucking out his eye, that they're sampling and tasting his fear. They really love that.
Mm-hmm.
So he definitely struggling to keep it all together there.
Oh, and you can tell they've never tasted anything like a Taviran before. When they said something about fate itself, I could imagine that that's what they meant there. They love people who are kind of special and set apart in some way, tied to the pattern in a way that's different from the average person. I think that's why they like the one power. I mean, you have people who have this conduit with the forces that keep time itself moving along. And so they seem to like channelers more than non-channelers, but
Right.
a Taviran is on a whole other level, I think, of being very physically tied into the pattern, which we don't really understand their connection to still, but this seems to be something that they're delighting in, is Matt's importance.
Right.
And his fear and his pain, of course, all that anguish, they seem to really delight in.
And that sick anticipation where he kind of has an idea of what's going to happen to him at best. I mean, the cringe factor there is just really high. It's really high. I get squeamish thinking about if I had to walk into that situation knowing how I was going to walk out, if everything went perfectly, how I was going to walk out. That's tough to take. So that would really add to just the physical fear, because I've even heard it said that people claim that during like bouts of any kind of torture or anything, most anybody can hold out until they think there's damage that you can't heal up from. Do you think losing a finger or something, that you broken bones and all, the pain is intense, but that will heal, or you have it in your mind that will heal. When something's done that there's no way you can ever heal from it, that's when people break from torture. And that's in a sense what Matt's going through here. He knows something's about to happen that you can't heal up from, that cannot be undone. And just that sick anticipation has got to be horrible. It is a torture in and of itself. And so they are enjoying feeding on Matt before they ever accept his payment. They're enjoying just that fear, that dread, that anticipation of the terrible things that are going to happen.
It's like they could smell it cooking, almost, if we're thinking about a food analogy.
That is, oh wow, that's so well said.
Yeah, it makes sense that he would be this upset and this afraid and this much more like, just sweaty and nervous compared to any other time we've really been embodied in his perspective. Because, thinking about violations of your bodily integrity, I mean, that's kind of your sense of identity is having all the same body parts that you have right now, right? So I could see him being especially upset by this. I mean, it's interesting that he's one of our most embodied characters, and that he makes decisions with his body in a way, and that that gets transgressed by one of his biggest moments in his story, or maybe the biggest, in my opinion, moment in his story arc, whereas that doesn't happen quite as much for some of our other characters. It seems like not even a big deal for Rand to lose his hand, for example, because he's kind of losing his connection to his own body already, because he's sort of preparing for that swap, even though he doesn't understand that's what's happening. He's got that connection to Moradin already, right? And Matt doesn't have anything like that to soften the blow. He makes this sacrifice, like being able to fully feel everything. And so it's a very big moment for his character. But also even just seeing Moiraine is such a huge moment psychologically for him as well. In what's probably, I think, Matt's most introspective moment, and he's got the most clarity of introspection in this moment. He seems to pinpoint exactly what his complicated feelings about Moiraine are when he sees her, which is pretty new for Matt, right? He's famously very unself-aware, but he seems to understand her now. He's still angry about the fact that she manipulated him, and that has not changed about him at this moment, but he is grateful, which he did not expect. He really appreciates how dedicated she's been to saving the world and also guiding the Taviran who needed to do it. And this is a huge breakthrough for him. He's had these feelings for her already, I think, but he has veiled them in layers and has not acknowledged them as he's wont to do. He thought that he would have trouble even leaving a Forsaken to one of these creatures. So, that kept it from being personal and wanting to actually rescue Moiraine for Moiraine's sake in any way. And he also gave himself an excuse where he understood that Moiraine saved his life from being boring in the Two Rivers, right? So he had a convenient excuse that, again, wasn't really personal gratitude to her. He twisted it into a self-serving explanation, even though that didn't seem to be the true reason that these emotions were welling up. So here, in the midst of the most climactic part of his arc, like physically, he's also finally been incredibly honest with himself here, and I really love this timing. So not only is he just kind of piercing to the heart of what his values are, really, which he doesn't really like to articulate or think about, he's getting physically pierced and that kind of bodily integrity being violated. And there's something interesting to be said about symbolism in literature where you have anything involving any kind of naturally existing orifice or like a wound of any kind. It tends to symbolize something about interacting with the outside world, right? Like you permeated that barrier of your identity and you're able to communicate with the outside in some other way more so than you did before. This kind of grotesque concept of blending. And we see that in the phrases like eyes are the window to the soul, that eyes are included in this as well. And it's interesting that we kind of are getting to a very deep part of Matt and him understanding himself at the moment where he has this physical window to the soul violated and destroyed, actually. So I don't know how intentional that is or how much I'm reaching, kind of like we hit upon in our last episode, that we might just be looking too deeply into some things when it comes to Matt. But I just found all those connections really interesting and very exciting. It's just the most exciting part of his story arc for me overall.
Right. And to me, it just really lent seriousness to the moment.
Yeah.
Because so many of the serious moments in Matt's story arc are still laced with humor. They're still laced with his own little personal flair of things that can at least see the world in a wry way, whether it's actually laughable or not. There's still this wry humor that's wrapped up in his point of view of the world. And right here, there is no humor. There is no joking. There's not even those thoughts, but these very serious thoughts, as you said, when he sees Moiraine and he has this, it's almost like a flash of inspiration of how she's changed his life and how, yes, she manipulated him just like everybody else, but she was the most honest about it. I believe it's the words he used. So I just see that it really lending so much more gravity to this moment, the upcoming moments, because we do know now, yes, he's helping to save the whole world, and he understood that sacrifice as well, but it's all very personal to him. But had there been any of the typical Matt moments in this, you'd still have the idea he's not really taking this seriously. He's not understanding what's happening. To me, this just reinforces the fact that he does understand, he does know, and this is his choice to make. And it makes me very proud of Matt just to see this bit of maturity about him. And almost like a paternal love toward her or something, or affection for her, which is not like Matt, not like anything Matt's ever exhibited toward anyone else. Even the way he treats Oliver is, even though he's a father figure to Oliver, he doesn't seem to have this paternal instinct toward Oliver, but he has a little, in my opinion anyway, a little flash of it toward Moiraine here at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, he normally plays that protector role, I suppose, more in a mass sense for a group of people in his role as a general, and so it's a little less personal. But here, he doesn't have any way to protect himself from that sense of personal responsibility, right? He's as vulnerable as it gets, physically and psychologically, both in this chapter.
Right.
I don't know. I think that's very important. That's one of his biggest problems that we've looked at over the past dozens of episodes, is that he isn't very willing to be vulnerable and feel much of anything. And here he felt a lot of emotions and a lot of physical pain as well, but all in the service of a greater good. And yeah, I'm just really proud of him and proud of his journey of acceptance that we saw begin pretty late in the overall books compared to everyone else. I mean, his perspective in general started late compared to our main characters, but I didn't see a whiff of acceptance until Lord of Chaos. And here we see finally the culmination of that, and I just love seeing it all come together. And I know that earlier I said I was going to try to get all the small things out of the way first and save this big moment for last, but the transitions just didn't work that way in the topics that we went through. There is one tiny piece that's just the last thing I have to think about in this chapter, is that I think there was a sneaky moment here where Matt was speaking in the old tongue, and you just have to be looking closely for it because they don't address it again. But it reminds me so much of his meeting with Brigitta, where she says something to the extent of, "Speak we which language, horn sounder," something like that. And then you understand from the wording that, oh, they're speaking the old tongue. So here, he's doing this to his companions, and it's right when the Finns show up, right after Tom grabs Moraine. Matt warns them to be careful about what they say, but he doesn't say it in his usual Matt Two Rivers vernacular. He says, "Mark your tongues," Matt said to Tom and Noel, trying to contain his worry. "Speak amiss, and they'll have you strung up, claiming it was your own desire. Ask nothing of them." It sounds so Shakespearean or something, right?
It does, and I hadn't realized, I had put that together, that's because he's speaking the old tongue. Oh, that's so awesome.
But there's no time for anybody to go, "What the heck did you say?" And I think they get the point. Okay, I'll keep quiet or whatever. He's already in old tongue mode because he's about to turn around and talk to the Finn, right? So I guess he didn't realize he transitioned in his mind a little early.
Yeah, you're right. He's been in old tongue mode ever since he started talking to the Eelfinn.
Yeah.
And it just flows for him. Now, this is a little off topic in a way, but I wonder how they're going to handle that in the show if we have the Elfin and Eelfinn. And I kind of hope that we do, but if so, are they going to have Matt talking in the old tongue and everything subtitled? Or are we going to have them speaking in English or whatever, whatever language the show is dubbed in whatever country you're listening to, but just a common language, and then everyone else act confused like they can't understand him. So I'm kind of curious how they'll handle that in the show.
I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I know I have seen shows do this. Because in television you're not tied to a single perspective, we don't have to worry about them doing it in a consistent way. I think they can do it differently at different times. That will be just fine. So they can sometimes, like, if we feel like the scene is from Matt's perspective, just put it in the language that the audience is listening in. Or if we feel like this piece of the scene needs to pivot for those comedic purposes and kind of zoom out so that it's from a non-Matt perspective, I think you could switch it around so that it sounds like they are speaking in a foreign language and the rest of the characters look confused. I think it will be very similar, actually, to talking about what the weaves are going to look like for channeling, because I think sometimes you're going to see them from a channeler's perspective and sometimes you won't. Just like Nynaeve's showdown with Moghedien in I still forget the name of this place, and I just did it in the last episode, the museum. I know it's not a museum, the Panarch's whatever place in Tanchico. And I think it mentions that if a non-channeler were walking by, they would just see two women staring at each other. And I think you could easily swap that scene back and forth for some kind of comedic effect. And I think they could really easily do that with the language with Matt too.
Yeah. And I've seen some shows do things where, like, at first they're speaking in another language and it kind of shifts to a different character's perspective and you're hearing it, from someone who understands that language. So they only have to do a line or two in a foreign tongue. And they may do something like that, which is kind of an in-between. But I had just wondered if they might not just stay in old tongue and subtitle those parts, as you see, to lend a little more realism, although I don't know how well that would actually work. But, it's fun to think about and wonder how they'll handle that. Again, assuming they keep the Eelfinn and Eelfinn in the show, which is so essential. I can't imagine it not being in there. But, a lot of things will have to change. But I definitely hope it is, and hope we can get a sense of the creep factor. Talking about the creepiness of the place. We've discussed before how things seem to change. The very non-Euclidean geometry. There are no straight lines in this place. And then not only will it change in the ways that what we think of, it's like you go down a hallway, turn around and walk back down it the other way and arrive in a different room. But when they're leaving, it doesn't have that same effect. He had asked for a straight path and they got a straight path. And so it's as if the corridor itself is just completely reshaped according to their whim. And so that's strange and weird and hard to wrap your mind around. But then you get to the way the foxes especially just appear and disappear.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one around, and you can kind of understand when one steps out of the darkness. Okay, they were just beyond the firelight because they don't like the light. They're only willing to come up close for a short period of time and then fade back into the darkness. But then when you get where the one grabs Matt's dice and he slashes it with his Ashendari, and the Ashendari goes right through it, just like it was mist or smoke. Didn't hurt it at all. And then you start wondering, well, how do they do that? We know iron hurts them, but why can this pass through them without hurting them? When they're in the Chamber of Bonds, where Moiraine is, there's these 8 pedestals. There's no one there. Suddenly, there are 8 of the Eelfinn there. I think, and this is just my theory, and it gets a little weird, but y'all know I like these long-haired sci-fi theories. and this one, to me, is as if they can manipulate time a little bit.
Yeah.
Perhaps slightly out of phase with us, so they can, like, picture in your mind, they can kind of freeze time. They can, go get up on their pedestals and get their outfit straight and then unfreeze it. But they can't interact with people while they're doing that. And if they could run up and slash someone with a weapon. You'd be helpless against them. Same thing when Matt slashes the Ashendari at one. It's there, and two objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time. So it's almost like they kind of phase to a little different time. So it's not occupying the same space at the same time. It doesn't injure them. Again, that's just an oddball theory. I don't know that it actually holds water, but that was how I was trying to wrap my mind around how they were doing what they were doing.
Yes.
And the appearing and disappearing trick happened every time you interacted with the Eelfinn, and I think the Eelfinn did it some as well. Just that, there's no one in the room, and suddenly there's someone behind you talking to you. But I remember it happening with every interaction with the Eelfinn for sure, and I think it did with the Eelfinn as well. So I think they've got a little touch of that, and for some reason they can't use that as a weapon against you. They can't. Maybe their weapons would pass right through you while you're frozen or while they're manipulating time, but they're able to do something like that.
I really like your explanations. I do like when we get kind of sci-fi on here, and I don't know if our listeners do. That's fine. I might give some warnings about how much of this you could skip if that's not your thing. We do have 2 chapters to get to now, and I'm going to have fewer discussion points on them. Did you have any more notes on chapter 54 before we move on?
A couple of minor things, I guess, as well. One of them, the way they take in or feed off people's emotions or experiences or sensations. We've gotten a little, I guess, a glimpse of that when Tom did throw a dagger, an iron dagger, and injure one of the Eelfinn. They saw, looked like that same steam or mist that you've seen 2 or 3 times in this world was escaping from the wound, but it was taking on the shape of like tortured people or people screaming or something. So you kind of have the sense, even though they fed off this, that they bleed out these sensations too. Whatever they had experienced is gone from them at that point. I got to wondering if coming back later and maybe even killing the Eelfinn that fed off some of your sensations would gain those things back from you or get them out of your head. So one of those little future endeavors for Matt to get them out of his head. Yeah, you kill the ones that fed off of you, and they can't do that anymore.
Well, as far as going back and trying to retrieve some of the things they've been kind of siphoning off from humans, I think that might even be in Oliver's future, because in the epilogue, he thinks about that. He thinks about how he wants to get revenge on the Shido, which is progress for him because he's not thinking about all Aiel being lumped together. This is the same part where he discovers Varen's letter, and it's too late because Caemlyn's already burning. A very timely reading of this. Right. And then he thinks about how he wants to get back at those snakes and foxes. And I just wonder if, since he won the game in that moment, if he will still feel motivated to go do that someday. But I have a feeling that he would be a very reckless kind of person. He's very much like Matt, and I see in his future a confrontation with them. Maybe I'd like to think, I don't know if it's really the souls, but I would want to release those aspects of those people that they have been consuming, right? It feels like you would let those people who have been victimized by them rest more somehow in my mind. I don't know if that's how it works with the soul metaphysics in this world, but it gives me a sense of that somehow.
Yeah, yeah. And the way that sensations become something physical there, because as Matt also, as his eye has been ripped out and he's in this excruciating agony, so much worse than he had anticipated or expected, or even I think that most of us would imagine. And he's got blood and sclera running down his face, and it says that kind of dries and
Yeah.
flakes off, which would normally take a lot
Right,
of
that was
time,
weird.
but it's happening almost instantaneously there. And they're seeing this fine white and red like mist coming off of him that the Eelfinn are feeding on, and that is the sensations, both the fear, the pain, all of that, what is internal to us becoming something physical that the Eelfinn can siphon off. So in that world, these things, it becomes a physical thing. And so literally this part of
Mm-hmm.
Matt, his pain and agony and sense of loss, all of that is becoming something physical that they're getting drunk on. I do like their reaction, the way they, just are just falling down.
Yeah.
They can't stand in the presence of this. It is the it, well, I guess you could say, as they would say in Ilion, this is the hard liquor.
Right.
This is not them sipping a
Yeah.
cold one. This is the hard stuff. And so they're siphoning that off of Matt. And Noel, or I think it was Noel, said, "Well, do we kill them?" Because they're laying there just insensate.
Yeah.
And Matt didn't want to because he knew that would probably negate the bargain. So
Mm-hmm.
he just wanted out of there. He'd already given enough, done enough, seen enough, and he just wants out by this
Yeah.
time. So yeah, I mean, those little tidbits thrown at you, just man, they lend so much realism to a story like this, because I can't tell you the number of times I've seen in a movie or seen in a book, the bad guy is down and nobody thinks to check his pulse or stab him again to be sure that he's down and stays down. They just go on with their lives and he comes up behind them. And this is one of the few stories I can think of where somebody's like, shouldn't we do something while they're just laying there? Uh,
Yeah.
because that would go through your mind. We've got an advantage here. Let's take it.
Yeah.
And I guess it's normal that Noel would be the one to think of that. We've talked about
Mm-hmm.
Noel's dark past
Yeah.
before. I love the reactions from Tom and from Noel. The way Tom would reach through the burning mist to go ahead and pull Moiraine out. Just, ignoring the pain. I don't care. Let me just get her out of there. I mean, my thought would have been take your cloak, throw it over, and wrap it around her and pull her
Yeah,
out or something.
right?
But Tom was not going to take that kind of time with it. He's just going to get her out. And so you have Matt looking back at him, thinking, well, what is with Tom? He seems so affectionate toward her. He's not looking at her, like okay, we're here to save an Aes Sedai, because Matt is still clueless on that entire relationship.
Mm-hmm.
He's as clueless as I was my first time through this series. Noel's reactions, how you can see Noel reacting with fear 2 or 3 different times in this chapter, but at the same time he's excited. He even says the statement, "Now I've finally seen something no man has ever seen before." Jane Farstrider has finally completed his quest. He feels like he's finally seen it all. There's no other mountain to climb, no other land to visit. He's experienced all of it. And I think that really leads well into the next chapter. So that's all I have, unless you have anything else you want to cover on 54.
Nope, that's all. So, in the interest of moving on to our 2 remaining chapters, I will go ahead and summarize chapter 55, The One Left Behind. And as I said, I have fewer notes on these, so feel free to jump in if you have some more once I get finished with this chapter. The One Left Behind exists because, of course, things would have wrapped up just a little too neatly had Matt not left a loophole in his demands, just like he was telling everybody else to be careful of. It begins with Matt having thrown their last deadly cylinder. The situation is increasingly dire. Music isn't working on the Eelfinn. They're too angry. For the same reason, they decide a bargain is unlikely to. Matt's luck is still pointing towards the way out, that straight passage he had asked for, but that ends up being a corridor full of the snake-like creatures. The rest of Matt's answers from them are calling up nothing new or helpful either. They're at a dead end in more ways than one. Tom is weary from carrying Moiraine, so Matt holds her. The Gleeman had previously left behind one of the packs to carry her. Noel has his last remaining pack with their 3 night flowers. He decides to buy Matt and Tom some space and time, to let the luck carry them to the Eelfinn realm and the way out. Maybe so that they could exit into the Stone of Tyr? That's what they're hoping to pull off. Noel takes the last of their supplies and sacrifices himself to hold a narrow passage against the snakes, revealing himself at the last to be Jane Farstrider, asking Matt to carry his story of honor and redemption to any Valkyrie he meets. Matt thinks of Noel as having been the true hero of the day. As they approach the snake's lair, Tom wonders if he should ask some questions of them himself, but Matt discourages it. There are no true answers, he insists, only tricks. The luck eventually takes them to the realm of the Eelfinn, to the red stone doorway to Tyr, only that arch lay crumbled. Both ways out are destroyed, and they can't find a way back to the original hole that they cut either. Matt tried spinning around and pointing with his eye closed again, only to find himself pointing back at that pile of rubble that should have been their escape. They're out of weapons, and the snakes start surrounding them. Moiraine wakes up, and Tom begins playing and singing a funeral song, possibly more for them than at any attempt to soothe the snakes. Matt keeps reflecting on Noel's earlier questions about how he got out of these realms during his first 2 visits. Well, they threw him out both times, didn't they? Those thoughts seem to lead him nowhere, another dead end. What did the Eelfinn give him? Let's see, he wanted the holes in his memory filled, and he keeps repeating this one over and over. It seems to lead him nowhere. So they gave him the experiences of the dead men, of course. He wanted a way to be free of the power and of Aes Sedai, so they gave him the medallion. They gave him the Ashendari, which he never asked for, but he had asked for a way out. He finally works it out in the last few moments as the Eelfinn keep closing in. He throws his spear into the wall where it cuts a slash, letting through blinding white light. He runs over and cuts it into the proper shape, the inverted triangle with a wavy line through, and he ushers Tom to take Moiraine on through while Matt holds off the dazed creatures. He can't resist leaving them with a final colorful set of insults before he hops through the portal himself, and thus ends Chapter 55, The One Left Behind.
And I have to say, this one, my first time through, it just broke my heart to lose Noel. Now, again, it surprised me that he was Jane Farstrider, because, again, Matt's character could partly have been designed after me, because I'm very dense about a lot of obvious things. Not only the relationship between Tom and Moiraine, but also the fact that Noel was Jane Farstrider. I never saw that one coming until this chapter, so it really threw me for a loop my first time through. The second time through my reread, the thing that stood out to me was the insults that Matt flung at the Eelfinn. Oh, I laughed so hard over that, even though my heart was breaking over losing Noel, this intense part of the story where they think they're going to die, and it's just right at the end, and he refers to him as the unwashed pigs' backsides, or sons of unwashed pigs' backsides, something. I can't remember it word for word, but it was so hilarious to me. And it's sad that my second time through that stood out to me more than anything, but I loved his last moment insults to the Eelfinn, because they did deserve that and more.
Yeah, I mean, it does stick out quite a bit, because at the end of the day, it's like perfectly on brand for this dramatic flair that he has been building and building throughout his arc. And he started out roguish, right? But not in a heroic way. And now he's combining both of those personas. So, I mean, one of the last places I noticed it, well, really one of the first places I noticed this flair during heroics, I guess you could say, is when he was yelling battle cries during the showdown with the Golem that we covered just a few episodes ago. But now that I think back, I think he was kind of a smart aleck to Darlin Cisnera when he was fighting him in the Stone of Tyr. So he's been doing this for longer than I thought, I guess. It's really culminated in this most cheeky cinematic scene of his, I think, where he does the hat tip and the string of insults.
Yes.
And it's interesting because he's cultivating his hero image in a lot more detail than he has before. He's so much more of a roguish, Indiana Jonesy kind of hero. But before this chapter, he never thinks of a hero as a positive thing. During this chapter, he's thinking about making Noel the hero of the story. And he keeps thinking about a hero having to be, one person at the center of a ballad or something. I wonder if this is just like a step along the road of him accepting his own heroic status. But I like that is left unresolved for us. If he ever if he ever does accept that, I think this has paved the way of seeing other people as honorable and heroic and that being a good thing instead of being a fool who's being manipulated by other people, which is how he used to think of heroes.
Well, I didn't write the quote down, so I don't have it right in front of me, but in chapter 54, the one I covered a few moments ago, he did kind of stop and say, well, maybe I'm a hero after all. But it's kind of as he's looking back at everything he's got to do and everything he's going to do when they were in the Chamber of Bonds. But yeah, so he did come this moment, well, maybe I am a hero after all. But it didn't take him long to drop that and want to go with Noel. Look at Noel is the real hero.
Yep. It's right when he goes to sacrifice his eye. I totally missed this, but we needed to have covered it. He says, well, burn me for a fool, Matt thought. Maybe I am a hero after all. Didn't that beat all? And then he said, I'll pay it. That's when he declared that he would sacrifice his eye when he understood what that meant.
But it didn't take him very long to get back to, nah, Noel's the real hero here.
Yes. Well, he was still talking about a hero as being a foolish thing. When he starts with burn me for a fool, I guess I'm a hero. He's like, look at me being a sucker, giving up my eye for some lady.
But it was to save the world, so yeah, it makes it a little more important. He probably would have done it just for Moiraine, but when you know that she's got a part to play, she's got to help save the world, yeah, doggone it, let's go ahead and do it. But again, after his injury, then Noel's the hero, because you've said it so many times and so much better than I, that Matt will whine and cry over an inconvenience, but something that really causes physical pain, he just ignores it. He acts like that's nothing. And I can't imagine the burning, the whole side of his face had to be swelling up from this attack against him, where his eye was just ripped out, not cut out surgically, but ripped. So the pain has just got to be immeasurable. And he's walking around thinking of how Noel is actually the real hero here, because he has a real injury that he can ignore. So, because he doesn't want people to fuss over him. He doesn't want people to make a big deal out of him until he's ready for them to pay attention to him. And he's not ready for someone to pay attention to him right now.
Yeah. He wants the attention on his terms.
Right. Oh, that was well said, yes.
Those were pretty much my thoughts on this chapter. Kind of bridging it to the other two, I think, but I didn't have a lot of other details to pull out. Did you have anything else?
No, there's not a lot of detail to that, except the Eelfinn did sort of break their word on this one. For them to get to this chamber, they had to backtrack back and forth in a passage. And of course, the Eelfinn were following them, preventing that from happening.
Oh, yeah.
So, Matt has said, none of this hiding it, just a straight passageway. And I guess it was straight, but it was straight back and forth they had to go. Had Noel not made his sacrifice, none of them would have escaped. The Eelfinn would have worn them down, chased them until they gave up and died. So yeah, in that sense, he was a hero. I love his moment of redemption, because he, out of all the terrible things that he's probably done in his past, he wanted to die clean, and wanted to do something good with his last moments, and I like that. I like the fact that they found a way to bring that about in the story. You wouldn't want to find out he was Jane Farstrider and he died in a cowardly way, or he turned on somebody he shouldn't have, and that betrayal would have, that was just almost too creepy to bear. But the fact that he dies clean, dies heroic, dies saving someone else, really makes you appreciate Jane a lot more. The fact that, he made some mistakes. He left his wife to go journey the world, and missed out on everything else he could have had. And he had a lot of regrets and a lot of darkness in his past, but he hadn't gone so far that he couldn't come back to the light. And I'm very proud that was personified in him and shown in him. So
yes, it was good that we got to see a dark friend turn themselves around where I felt like we might have had that potential in Asmodean had his story not been cut so short. Or not. I think we would have had the potential for him to make that choice, but he wouldn't have.
Right.
Yeah, I remember thinking early on in our podcast that I don't see that, like, redemption happening enough. You hear that. You can't go so far into the shadow that you can't be brought back into the light, but we don't see it. But I forgot that we had seen it with Noel.
Yeah.
I think I had never really looked into his storyline enough and didn't put all the pieces together back then.
And we did see it with Varen, but again, that that's over halfway through the story, and Noel's comes at the very end. And you're right, until then, we don't really see.
Yeah, I still don't know how much she counts to me, though.
Oh, right. Well,
because her joining the shadow was unwilling. I mean, she continued to do things, but it was, I mean, she kind of had to stay alive, right? So, yeah, I don't think about her as counting so much as a dark friend, really.
Well, you're right. She worked with him. She studied them. She was part of the cabal, but in her heart, she was not a dark friend. You're right. I don't think she worshipped the Dark One as so much as, again, like you said, yes, she had to be there. So maybe that doesn't count. But yeah, with Noel, we see someone coming back, but you just don't see that much in the story. You're right. That was a phrase that's used a lot, but not something you see very often.
Yeah, and this is a lot like Ingtar's last stand, I guess. That's sort of how he tried to redeem himself as well.
You're right. Oh, gosh, I totally forgot that one. I totally forgot Ingtar. Yeah,
well, that was such a short arc.
Yes, you only find out he's got something dark in his past about 10 seconds before he sacrifices himself, and no one knows it but Rand. That's another thing that made his very significant, is the fact that no one knows it but Rand, and Rand would not share that. He would not discolor people's image of Ingtar. But you're right. So there was some early in the story, but it's a precious few, and I think we should honor their memories. It's only fitting to do so.
Yes, and that is one of the things that Matt does in this chapter 57, A Rabbit for Supper, which begins with Matt hitting the ground outside the Tower of Genjai, a bit surprised that he had exited here instead of Rhuidean. He hoops and hollers about how he got the better of them, slamming the butt of his spear on the ground in victory, and then Moiraine asks, in her small voice, a question that sobers him. Who was the other, the man I didn't know? A great man who didn't make it out. Tom, be sure to put him as the hero when you write a ballad about this. Now that he thought about it, Matt realized Tom didn't seem surprised about Noel's identity. Why had he never told Matt? Some friend. He asks the older man never to let him negotiate again. Just hit me over the head if I think of doing something like that again, he asks. Matt, uneasy still about this tower looming over them, asks that they move. And then the scene switches to a shaded meadow near the Arenelle tributary stream that we saw back in chapter 53, Gateways, before they entered the tower. Moiraine recounts her time in there. The creatures savor emotion, she explains, but they don't need it to survive. As she talks, Matt thinks about how much more human she seems now, how her being humbled makes her stronger somehow. Holding Tom's cloak tightly about herself, she lit a fire that Tom was struggling to start with damp wood. She explained it's about all she can manage now with the one power without her Angreal. The creatures used it to prolong and feed upon her capacity for the one power and her anguish at losing it. They claim to have drained Lanfear too quickly and killed her, although Moiraine doesn't believe it. She remembers a man being there, saying Moiraine was not the one he came for. She seems to think that Lanfear must have been rescued by him. The readers, however, can put this together with what we know from other perspectives. Moradin entered Sindal and either killed Lanfear there or let the Finn do so in the manner that they had described, in order to allow her soul to be liberated from those realms so that the Dark One could resurrect her, as the greatly diminished Sindain that we see later in the story. But back to Moiraine's story. She didn't realize when she listed the Angreal as one of her demands that it would be used to amplify and prolong her draining process. And what were her other demands? Those are none of Matt's business, of course. She does offer healing for his eye socket, though, which he stubbornly refuses. Still afraid of the power, I see, she accuses, and advises that sometimes the things we dislike are really for our own good. Typical Moiraine, she's got to moralize and lecture right away, but he supposes he can let her get away with it just this once because she's really the hero of this story, after all. Her next step is to seek out Rand. But the two fill her in on some of the events that have been happening in the world in the meantime, like the cleansing of Sidene, Elaine taking the throne of Andor, and Matt's marriage to the Shan-Chen Empress. She's flabbergasted by a couple of these, and she's missed quite a lot, but she doesn't have a lot of time for stories. She's got to get to Rand. Great, says Matt. You can do that yourself. I have stuff to do in Camelin. She seems to take Matt's defiance in stride and has one more thing to attend to before they leave anyway. She asks Tom to marry her, and Matt reflects the experience of many a reader by wondering where in the world that came from. Well, Matrim, Tom says, taking on the voice of the author, poking fun at the readers, you just weren't paying close attention. Matt rests secure in the fact that he may be married, but he will not be tied down with a water bond like Tom's apparently mad self just agreed to do. And Tom immediately undermines that confidence by reminding Matt that his wife has the ability to learn to channel, so who knows, you might be bonded one of these days. And here Matt started this chapter thinking he had really gotten one over on the trixiest creatures in creation, and now he feels like a complete, bumbling fool who, in his words, quote, brought a hog to a horse race, end quote, because of how badly Tom and Moiraine had just turned the world upside down for him. He decided to give the two some privacy and take some time to reflect, and he wanders off to their previously arranged gateway location to check it out. He builds a cairn in memory of Noel, and he thinks about how his missing eye might affect his ability to fight. It made getting out of the tower difficult enough. But it turns out that Ta'Veren luck works better when you don't look too carefully anyway, as he's reminded when he randomly throws a knife and spears a rabbit for supper. He even finds a lost cookpot in the stream, so Moiraine will have her tea after all. And thus ends chapter 57, A Rabbit for Supper.
I find myself almost speechless at this one. This is a chapter I dearly love. I did the first time I went through it because, again, some of those ends are tied up for us, those loose ends, and explained in a way that even I could understand it. But it's just so perfectly mapped.
Yes. We get the levity back in this chapter, for sure.
Right. And then this calm acceptance of his Ta'Veren nature when he just throws a knife,
yeah,
accidentally spears a rabbit. Oh, look, there's a cookpot that washed downstream. And he just goes with it. He's not even surprised. He's not, hey, y'all, you're never going to guess what happened. That's just the life of a Ta'Veren. It's not good for anything unless you lose an eye and are hungry. So they just managed to, to pretty much do your part to save the world. So.
Yeah, and this harkens back to his chapter in The Shadow Rising, where he's throwing knives blindfolded and really freaking out the Aiel, and they decide never to gamble with him again. It also harkens back to, a lot of The Shadow Rising, where he just has a fit and he's like, Tom, I'm going to walk out and stop talking to you if you say the word Ta'Veren again, right? He just cannot handle this. It's interesting that Moiraine says the word Ta'Veren to his face when he mentions how he accidentally married the Shan-Chen Empress, and he just sort of shrugs, right? He doesn't flip out about it. That's a huge mark of his acceptance, for sure, before we even get to the rabbit and the cookpot.
It does show, again, this level of maturity with him, which is hard to express when he, leaps from the hole in the wall, lands outside, and he starts whooping and hollering and yelling about how he won, how he beat them.
Yeah.
It's not so much childishness as it is just pure relief.
Oh, yeah.
Just the joy of being alive. It made me think of after the battle where he had killed Couladin, and all the men are celebrating and singing the songs, and he said, that's just the joy of being alive, though, that you didn't die like all the people around you. So you have this sense of relief and just overwhelming urge to live a little bit and enjoy the fact that you're still alive. And to me, that's what he's experiencing right there, this rush of it, until he's reminded that, okay, we didn't all survive. So he does sober up pretty quickly. He doesn't make any jokes about that. I think his statement to Tom about, when you make a ballad about this, make sure Noel is the hero of the story. I believe those are genuine.
Yeah, and speaking of that hero comment, I think it's interesting that Matt seems to think the story has to have one hero. He keeps trying to figure out who is the hero, which one of them is it, because he mentions Noel several times in the last chapter, some in this chapter, and then he goes, well, Moiraine was the real hero, right? Thinking about what she sacrificed, knowing she was walking into this. So it reads like the voice of the author speaking pretty directly to us, in my opinion, to remind us that this is an ensemble cast. This story is about all of them. And this is something that comes out even more explicitly in Rand's story in the last battle when he's confronting the Dark One. He has to learn this lesson to do his part to save the world. Heroism isn't always, or maybe even most of the time, it's not an individual accomplishment. It's a cooperative effort of many people. They're all collectively heroes. There are important individual actions without which, an individual making that decision, certain things wouldn't have happened, but they all play a role in this thing that's much larger than themselves.
In my reread, I'm to that point where Rand is facing the Dark One. And just today, I heard those words again. Isn't my sacrifice enough? Why do they have to suffer? So he's still struggling with that, and he does all throughout the story till you get to the very end of it. Actually, yeah, you're right. It's shown to us throughout the story over and over that it is a group effort. It's not just Rand saving the world. It's the fact that the light has everyone in place that needs to be there doing the things they were created to do in order to preserve life and to preserve the world. I hope that all of our listeners will join us next time for episode 41 when we get into A Memory of Light, chapters 11 and 15.
Subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, and that last one is under the name Lajara Dane, Lajaradayne, to get notified when a new episode drops every Wednesday. Leave us feedback by rating and reviewing on your preferred podcast listening platform, or by contacting us through email at lajaradane@gmail.com, or on Twitter at mind_wheel for the show account, or for my personal account at Lajara Sedai, that's Sedai. And to support the show, you can visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Wheel of Mind. Quick shout out to our newly labeled novice level patron, Malia. She's been supporting the show for a while, but I've now actually got Patreon tiers set up, so she's a novice. If you join our Patreon team, like Malia has done, you can get access to some cool perks, like joining our Discord server, like seeing behind-the-scenes show notes, asking us questions that we could answer on air, and even, in some cases, getting to guest host the show. So check it out. And in the meantime, this is not the ending to the turning of the Wheel of Mind, but it is an ending.
Shazam!